everyone, and welcome to today's press briefing. I'm Donna Bush. As always, I'm very glad that you could be here with us on our various channels, as well as on Radio Cayman. Today's discussions with members of the panel will surround the regulations, an update on those, as well as a summary of COVID-19 information, as well as the reopening plan for cruise tourism. We welcome our panelists, the Honorable Premier, Mr. Wayne Panton, the Honorable Sabrina Turner, Minister for Health and Wellness, as well. In the studio with us, we have members of the media, Dr. Autilia Newton, the Interim Chief Medical Officer, as well as senior civil servants. We're going to go first this morning to Dr. Autilia Newton.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here today. So we start this press conference with just a few summary points on what is the COVID situation at the moment here in the Cayman. As you can see from the weekly report, which is published on the website of the government, our cases are, positive cases are continuing to go down, which is obviously a very, very good news. Unfortunately, the week reported, which was week 10 last week, we had the 2 additional deaths, which have now brought the total toll of deaths, COVID deaths since the start of the pandemic to 23. And our sympathies and condolences are with the families. This is tragic, as you can imagine, because these are people who unfortunately have succumbed to a disease which a couple of years ago didn't exist. I have to remark that both these people were quite fragile for their comorbidities, but also they were unvaccinated. Which brings me to the key message I want to stress again to you all. We have one tool, which is the most robust one to protect us from COVID, and this is the vaccination. The vaccination is not 100% perfect. There is no vaccine which gives you 100% protection for any infectious disease. However, it's the best that we have. And the current vaccines are fairly effective. They might not protect you from reinfections. I was just reading yesterday on international communications that people have got infected 3 times with 3 different variants of the virus. But what the vaccine will do will protect you from the very severe form of the disease and from death. So please, please take advantage of the offer of the vaccination booster if you haven't had it yet. This is for anybody from the age of 12 upwards. Take advantage if you want to have your first, second dose, whatever it is. And then for the children now between the age of 5 and 11, we are trying really very hard to reach as many as possible of them. This will protect them. We have had the children who have ended up in hospital in Cayman, some of them with very serious complications. We want to avoid that, and we want to reduce the circulation of the virus in the community. That is the effect and the power of vaccination. I think some people might be concerned in hearing the latest news from countries where they are seeing a spike in Omicron cases caused both by the BA1 and BA2. We have had already the Omicron wave here, so if we keep up our vaccination rate, I think we will be in a good place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Newton. We now go to our Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Donna, and good morning to all, and thank you for joining us here today. Earlier this week, Cabinet approved further amendments to the COVID-19 regulations, which will come into effect on Monday, March 21st. We are still, I confirm, we are still in phase 5 of the COVID-19 critical readiness, preparedness, and response plan. The changes to our COVID-19 regulations reflect a continuation of a balanced and pragmatic approach that we've been taking, and that has underpinned our reopening plan. Now, as mentioned during the last press conference on February 17th, the continuation of the reopening would involve the conservative reintroduction of cruise tourism. And obviously that is aimed at supporting our economy, and it is structured in a way to allow us to monitor the implications of that reintroduction for a period of time. Now, our colleague, the Honourable Minister of Tourism, Mr. Kenneth Bryan, who has been a strong advocate for the return of cruise tourism, is unable to be here on the panel today as he is off island, but obviously I am sure that he's here with us in spirit, and he is probably going to be watching this keenly. Ladies and gentlemen, the success of our regulations, the uptake of our vaccination program, and the efforts of both this government and our wonderful community to adhere to the safety measures in place have allowed us to manage the community spread and witness a continuing decline, as you have heard in the update from Dr. Newton, not only in the number of cases, but perhaps most importantly, a decline in the number of severe cases requiring hospitalization. And as much as we mourn every loss, our rate of death remains very low as well. Though the government acknowledges that there are no guarantees when it comes to containment and management of COVID-19, and a new variant could emerge at any time, we're confident, based on the preparations made, that we can safely advance to this important milestone, that of reintroducing cruise tourism. And to do so, we have agreed to ease some of the current restrictions and regulations contained in Phase 5. Now, I'm pleased to give a very brief overview of these amendments as it relates to cruise tourism and one or two other areas. This will provide us additional information on the intent and operation of the changes, especially for the tourism sector. The return of the cruise tourism is obviously a critically important part of our economic recovery, and it is particularly so for hundreds of Caymanians, Caymanian-owned businesses, and thousands of Caymanians that are employed in those businesses. Now, turning specifically to the changes, the amended regulations, as noted earlier, will come into effect on Monday, March 21st. The two regulations that are relevant are the Control of COVID-19 Travel Amendment Number 3 regulations, 2022, and the Control and Management of COVID-19 Amendment Number 2 regulations of 2022. The most important changes to these new regulations will do the following, and this relates initially to health protocols around cruise ship return to Cayman, cruise ships return to Cayman. As we have had with the general reopening plan, we similarly have a phased plan for the initial return of cruise tourism. The cruise lines scheduled to arrive in phase 1 of the cruise tourism plan have agreed to comply with health protocols, which I will outline shortly, and are obligated under the Public Health Act 2021 revision to complete and return a medical declaration of health form prior to a cruise ship calling on Grand Cayman. Now, the Chief Medical Officer has met with cruise line health practitioners and had the opportunity to review their health protocols that operate, of the cruise lines that operate under the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association. And she is satisfied with these arrangements. Now, for all approved cruise ship calls, the following health protocols must be adhered to. Firstly, guests aged 12 and older must have received their final dose of a Cayman Islands approved COVID-19 vaccine at least 14 days prior to the beginning of the cruise. Fully vaccinated constitutes 2 doses relating to vaccines with double dose that require double doses, and 1 dose relating to vaccines that require a single dose. Secondly, consistent with our current regulations, children under the age of 12 years will take the status of traveling adults in their group. Next, all crew must be vaccinated. Then we will not be taking any COVID-positive passengers or crew or close contacts of COVID-positive passengers or crew who are permitted no positive COVID passengers, crew, or close contacts of positive passengers or crew are permitted to disembark the cruise ship on Grand Cayman, whether they're symptomatic or not. It should be noted that all legal obligations under the international maritime law will, of course, be adhered to. Lastly, I want to mention that any prevalence of COVID-19 virus detected on board a cruise ship is assessed by looking at the evidence of sustained onboard transmission, the timeline of infections, and measures taken on board to control the spread of cases. There is legislation already in place requiring vessels arriving in territorial waters to provide certain information to the officer on duty at the port before making physical contact with the shore. That includes information relating to persons who are suffering from any disease or who have suffered from any disease during the voyage. The vessel remains in quarantine until such time as the officer on duty has given the vessel a license to communicate with the shore. At the end of phase 1, which is going to be a period of 4 weeks, if public health continues to approve cruise calls based on the current health environment, there will be no longer any monthly capacity constraints on cruise vessels or cruise passengers, and all health protocols from phase 1 will then continue into phase 2. Turning to other changes beyond cruise, there are also changes in relation to travel to and between the sister islands. We've increased the age requirement from 5 years and older to 18 years in relation to this section. This would mean that unvaccinated persons who are under 18 years old and who are accompanied by a person who has completed an approved course of vaccine at least 14 days prior to the date of travel shall not be required to obtain a PCR test or an approved lateral flow test from a registered health care facility prior to travel. A vaccinated child under the age of 18 would not have to be tested prior to intra-island travel at all. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I firmly believe that the relaxations to the current requirements to facilitate our phased cruise return plan are coming at a time that will positively impact our economic recovery, and they're helping us to define a new normal for our cruise tourism industry and our tourism industry as a whole. And this will help us to move more effectively towards full economic recovery, and that will benefit the many Caymanian-owned businesses and the significant number of Caymanians who rely on cruise and tourism generally for their livelihoods. These new regulations are also good for inter-island travel, as they allow a greater proportion of younger residents and visitors to travel without the extra step and added inconvenience of testing. Whether you expect to be interacting with cruise visitors or taking a trip to one of our beautiful sister islands, I still encourage you to take the necessary precautions, especially if you're going to be in crowds. Please do your own lateral flow test, and if you plan to visit our elderly and our vulnerable, make sure that you're tested prior to carrying that out. If you're negative, of course, you're good to go. If you're positive, please report as required to the health, to public health. It is the responsibility of each person in our community to maintain the safety and health and hygiene practices that we know help to keep us safe and healthy. This responsibility includes getting your booster shot or getting vaccinated if you have not already done so. Cayman, I once again assure you that all the COVID measures this PAC government have put in place are for the overall health and safety of our community, our visitors, and our people. I want to reassure the public who may find further relaxation of restrictions uncomfortable that we will continue to monitor the global responses to this pandemic, follow the science, and make changes to our critical preparedness and response plans based on the best advice and information available to us. Now, as we continue in this journey, we must have faith in our plans and confidence in our decisions that our policies are working, because the data demonstrates that. We clearly are having good results because of the plans we have put in place. Now, careful monitoring will alert us to any divergence from the pattern of containment, and of course we will adjust as necessary to protect the health of our community. Thank you all for doing your part and continuing to social distance, wear your masks, employ good hygiene practices, and as I said before, get boosted. Do it for your community, do it for your family, and do it for your own health and well-being. Thank you very much, and I wish all of you in our wonderful Cayman Islands a safe and enjoyable weekend. And while I'm talking about the weekend, let me also mention that another change that was made to the regs was the removal of 12 Mile Bank from Schedule 1 of the management regs, which would have required you to get customs approval before going there. So that will allow people to go and enjoy fishing on 12 Mile Bank for the weekend. Anyway, thank you all very much. God bless. Take care.
We now go to the Minister for Health and Wellness, the Honourable Sabrina Turner.
Thank you, Donna. I'm so pleased to hear that at least this weekend all of those fishermen can go out on 12 Mile Bank, and I'm quite sure that they're jumping with joy as we continue to show what it's like living with COVID and moving on, and especially for the regulations and in cruising and reintroducing cruise tourism. I'm quite sure that those people within that industry will get that sense of independence back. And it just shows the collaborative effort in us as a jurisdiction fighting and navigating our way through these difficult times. But the Cayman Islands has noted, as stated earlier on by the doctor, Dr. Newton, we've seen a decline, and I'm so happy to see that, in new positive COVID-19 cases for the 6th consecutive week. And that was stated and produced in our weekly situational report. And we can attribute this to a number of factors. One being that the Cayman Islands should boast for being a regional leader in COVID-19 vaccinations. Two, that we're at the end of our previous Omicron surge. And thirdly, that the public has shown that remaining compliant with the mask mandates and COVID-19 protocols outlined by public health has gotten us where we are today, and for that we should all be proud of. I also want to take this opportunity to thank each and every person in the Cayman Islands for assisting in getting us this far and remaining patient throughout these trying times of the pandemic. However, it would be honestly remiss of me to not mention the struggles that we have endured. And as previously stated, 23 persons have lost their lives to the coronavirus here in the Cayman Islands, and unfortunately, the majority of those whom were all unvaccinated. To date, the Cayman Islands has also had 237 persons hospitalized due to COVID-related causes. While this is markedly lower than many other places in our region, a number of these cases could have honestly been prevented if the patient had taken advantage of the protection offered by vaccination. Again, I will also strongly encourage for each of you to seek booster vaccination. As we welcome more visitors and travel overseas ourselves, having a booster enhances our immunity and offers peace of mind. We have been exceedingly fortunate to not have any juvenile deaths since the onset of this pandemic. However, we have noted several severe infections in children right here in the Cayman Islands. To date, 16 children have been hospitalized locally, mostly presenting with high fever and/or dehydration, and some with life-threatening symptoms. For a small, knit community as the Cayman Islands is, this is quite alarming. It is quite an alarming number. As a mother, I would like to urge each parent who has a child or children to get covered by the vaccination program. Get your child vaccinated and give them all the defense that they can get. As your elected arm, it is our duty to make access, and in this case, to vaccines. That is what we have done. We have moved and we continue to promote and give persons that opportunity to get vaccinated. And we will continue in this effort because the data proves it works. Consider how much the pandemic has impacted our children already, socially, academically, and also physically. Give them the gift of protection. We have expanded vaccination to the schools via our school health nurses, and parents of children ages 5 through 11 will have received a letter and vaccination consent form from their school health nurses. You can also download the form from hsa.ky or explore.gov.ky. Vaccination is also available to children ages 5 through 11 by appointment if you prefer this route. Parents and guardians can also contact Public Health Clinic. Their hours of operations are Monday through Friday, 8:30 until 3 p.m., and you can reach them on 926-8152 or 926-8733 here in Grand Cayman, and for our sister islands, they can be reached on 244-7643. One thing to be remembered is that if your child has recently had COVID-19 infection, they must wait for 12 weeks before getting vaccinated. And you should report this should you show up at one of the sites or for one of those vaccination programs, and be very open and honest with those public health officials when registering your child. There is a special children's vaccination page on explore.gov.ky that is primarily dedicated to answering commonly asked questions about pediatric COVID-19 vaccines. It provides parents with informational resources and much, much more. So I encourage parents to browse the page if they need more supplemental information to help them in making that decision to vaccinate their child or children. As we edge closer to normalcy, we cannot become complacent, nor should we forget what has brought us here thus far. And I ask the public to please remain vigilant to change and new threats generated by the evolution of COVID-19 virus, and continue to heed the advice of our proven medical experts. Thank you for your time, and God bless these Cayman Islands.
Thank you very much, Minister Turner, for that update. We're going to now move into questions from members of the media. We begin with April Cummings from Radio Cayman.
Hi, everyone. I don't have very many questions today. One of them is, I assume it's for you, Mr. Turner, but Premier, please feel free to weigh in. What's our current thinking when it comes to the wearing of masks, based on kind of just seeing what's going on globally? And I know you've talked about it from time to time, but I'm sure people would love to hear an update.
Okay, I'll get a stab and the Premier can add on. This has been a very topical question. We've discussed it at numerous of times in Cabinet and in caucus, and we feel with the introduction of crews, as we continue to open and relax our regulations, that is still encouraged, and we have kept it in our current regulations to have it as a mandate for indoor activities. You will notice with the recent regulations that it was relaxed for outdoor sporting activities and so forth, where social distances can be exercised. And we continue to monitor. This is in abundance of caution and guided by the experts. We still feel that it is necessary in dense areas where the numbers were increased, especially for indoor activities, where there could be challenges in also exercising social distance, that it was still important for you to have some form of facial covering. And that is why for this, at least for this phase, because these current regs go on until the end of April, we will assess it then and to see whether or not it'll remain as a mandate, which is still required by law, or give persons that choice. But as it is right now with the introduction of crews, as we relax in other areas, we felt it was the right thing to do at this particular time to keep it in place just for a few more weeks.
Thank you. Mr. Premier?
Yes, I would only add that, I know that, we live in a world where information on what's happening all over the world is available minute by minute, if not second by second. And many countries are moving away from mandating mask requirements, even though they still have, significant levels of infection. I've always said that from my perspective, and I think my colleagues generally share the view that a lot of these things are being driven for political reasons, and our concern is really to try to make sure that the health of our people come first. And we will try to ensure that we follow the advice, follow the science, and that effectively suggests that we're not just yet at the point where we think it's safe completely to drop the mask requirement. As my colleague, Minister Turner, has indicated, we will keep it under review, and it may be that in 4 or 5 weeks' time, we can have another look at that. The regs, as she has indicated, continue at the moment. Will expire in April, later in April, but we will, we will continue the review of this, and if we feel it's safe, we're happy to consider that at that point to relax those. But it is not something that we're going to just take just because somebody else is doing it.
Yeah. And you must, I've gotten a number of calls and questions for the policies that are still in place for the schools, especially for our public schools, where parents are saying, why can't we relax it for the children? Remember, we just got the vaccines for the 5 to 12s. So we were also waiting for that opportunity to arise to see the uptake in that, giving them the protection before looking at it. So it's a combination of factors that will lead us down that path.
And forgive me if it's in the situational report, but do we have a sense of what the take-up has been like in that age group, the under 12s, I guess?
The numbers continue to increase, but I think Dr. Newton would be able to give a bit more on the actual numbers.
Thank you. Let me just double check whether it's on the exact number is there. Yes. So far, and this is, the previous week, we have had 344 children between the age of 5 and 11 being vaccinated. I think figures will change next week because of the school sessions which are being organized as we speak. We know that we have around yeah, there is quite a bit to go there to get a decent uptake. It is very, very initial, bearing in mind that there have been school holidays in the middle, etc. So it has been a bit slow to start with. But so far, at the end of last week, we had 344 children between the age of 5 and 11 who had already received the first dose. Thank you.
So that would probably be fair to say then that, if we are looking at this 4 or 5 weeks down the road, we'll have an increased booster uptake, we'll have an increased uptake of vaccines in relation to children, and hopefully we will have reflected a continual decline in our rate of infections. So that all puts us in a much better position to consider making further relaxations.
And as you said, you evaluate on an ongoing basis.
Yes.
One more question, and if you want to come back, it's fine too. This is related to the sort of we're on the eve of the return of cruise tourism, and I know not everyone loves cruise tourism. There are those who would prefer that things stayed the way they were. I've heard both sides of it. But from your perspectives, how are you feeling about where we are and, what it's going to be like next week?
Well, I think just to put it in context, the first phase has a limit of about 75,000 passengers. So that is well below the numbers. That's probably around 1/4 of the sort of numbers that may have been seen in the past, sort of at the height of cruise tourism pre-pandemic. So the experience should, both for those residents on island, those stayover tourists who are visiting, and our cruise visitors, the experience should be very good. And it's something the first ship to come in is going to be the Disney Magic. I think they have about 2,700 passengers. And I think it's very fitting to have the Disney Magic being the first ship to come in, because we are a heavily family-oriented jurisdiction, and tourism jurisdiction, and obviously Disney Cruise Lines is as well. So I think it's going to be a good start. The minister is actually planning on being here to greet them. I think one of his parliamentary secretaries will be here with him. So I'm sure everybody's going to have a good time. It'll be the first cruise ship coming back into Cayman in over 2 years. So it's a very, very significant event, very significant milestone. As we've indicated earlier, the transition from phase 1 to phase 2 is going to be based on monitoring and assessment of where things come out in terms of whether we detect any changes in our infection levels or anything, and that is all going to happen seamlessly. If we decide that there is no need to make any changes, we're just going to continue into phase 2. There'll be no need at that point in time to make any specific changes to regs. But I think in general, we as politicians, as representatives of the people of the country, and in our own constituencies, we understand the pain and the difficulties that people who have been relying on cruise tourism historically have been going through for the last 2 years. And certainly we have had the obligation and the need to make sure that we provide for them. We've put in place these and maintain and continue these stipend payments to help support those individuals. And this represents a real change where people can sort of regain their dignity, go back to work, do the things they really enjoy, and make resume making a living at it. And they will no longer have to rely on government support. That to me is a huge change, and it reflects a significant degree of pride for those individuals to be able to do that. It's something that I think everybody has been looking forward to, and we in government will celebrate along with them. The return of this significant part of our tourism product. our tourism generally has been doing exceptionally well. There's been a huge surge in the number of visitors to the island, and restaurants are now filling up again. Many of the rental car companies are running out of stock even, and it is good to see that happening. It's good to see a sense of normalcy returning. It doesn't mean that COVID has gone away. So that is why we have to continue to be vigilant. We have to continue to assess and make sure that we remain in a position to be able to respond if the data indicates that we should respond. But so far, so good. We're very hopeful, very optimistic, and very proud of the people who have put in so much effort and time in making this possible for all of us in Cayman.
Okay, thank you very much for those questions. April, we're now going to call on Wendy from CNS.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
I'll get into it quickly. You say that it's the slow phased approach, but on I think it's the 6th of April, be 11,500 passengers coming in. Where are we going to put them? Royal Palms is closed, Calico Jacks is closed. None of the hotels are allowing people on the beach that are not staying with them. Where they're going to go?
Well, I'm hoping that with the news that we were resuming operations, that those businesses that have historically catered to cruise tourism on the beaches will have begun operations and begun plans to resume operations, I should say, and be able to welcome them. Obviously, it is not going to be a complete return. That we're not going to have 100% of the businesses operational at the right time, but we still have businesses that provide attractions all over the islands, and I think there will be enough operational to be able to provide a significant flavor of the wonderful tourism products that we offer in Cayman.
The balance between the two, a lot of people who cater to cruise also cater to overnight. It's not like two separate things. There's a big merge. So the people that the tour operators want overnight guests just as much as they want cruise. And the argument at the moment is that you're still stifling overnight guests with all the testing, but the cruise passengers are not going to be tested. The cruise passengers are not wearing masks on board their ship, all that kind of thing. So what message do you have about that imbalance?
Well, I think when you say with all the testing, we're not doing any testing on island now. We're only doing the pre-arrival testing. The cruise visitors, when they arrive and just before they go on the cruise vessel, they're doing embarkation, I guess you could call it. When they're going on to the cruise ship, they're being tested at that point. In terms of the vessels that we have selected to come in during this phase 1 assessment period, we've sort of risk weighted, and I think the Minister Bryan has discussed this previously. We've sort of risk weighted those vessels, and we've tried to get the highest number of vessels coming in with the lowest level of risk. And the lowest level of risk is presented by those vessels that are making Cayman their first stop. Now, I don't know, I can't recall exactly how many, but there's perhaps 20%, maybe as much as 30% of those that are in that situation, but clearly not all. Cayman is blessed to be geographically in a great position between popular ports, other popular ports, that we are a very significant stop, and we're very important to the cruise market. But we're certainly not ordinarily the first stop, and that makes it difficult for us to maintain that we insist on having on being the first stop. There's also the other point that we certainly in our discussions with the cruise lines, we had previously asked to have pre-disembarkation testing. So we wanted to have them do
But they declined, right?
lateral flow tests before they disembarked. I think understandably they outlined in considerable detail the difficulties, the logistical difficulties that would prove to them, and I think we at the end of the day we accepted that it would be difficult for that to happen. The counterbalance to that, of course, is that unlike the stayover tourists who are usually here for an average of 5.5 days, the cruise visitors are probably here on average on a daily basis between 5 to 6 hours. So it represents a much smaller window of opportunity or much smaller window of risk with those that are visiting. And I think it also reflects a reality that when they're doing their cruise, their tours, they're sort of operating in sort of like little bubbles. They're not necessarily operating and interacting significantly with the rest of the population of the country as the average stayover tourist would.
A lot of the boat operators and tour operators say that their boats are not up to scratch. They don't have the money. A lot of them can't afford their insurance, that kind of thing. Is there going to be any more money set aside to help them?
We have, we've just done Finance Committee yesterday morning, and we voted an additional $5 million.
That's for the stipend, though, isn't it?
No. I was just going to clarify. There was an additional $15 million voted for stipends, and we're not going to spend it if we don't need to. We'll be doing the assessment, but we wanted to make provision for the potential to have to pay that over the next several months. We strongly believe, as we have seen in the last couple of months, we've seen a decline in the numbers of people that need the support. And we strongly believe that's going to continue to go down. But we're making provision for that with the $15 million stipend budget. We have also, in relation to your original question, we've also budgeted an additional $5 million to help support small and micro businesses who need help in the coming period of weeks and months.
Why did it take so long to get this policy rolling? The outline business case, strategic policy consultants for the cruise tourism. Given that we're opening to cruise on Monday, y'all been in office for a year. We've got massive amounts of information about tourism. Why do we need consultants to tell us how to run the cruise policy? And B, why wait so long?
I think, to be honest, we have been so busy dealing with the everyday issues that have come about in COVID, the changed world that COVID presented to us, that we just had not had time to direct ourselves specifically to getting consultants on board to help with a cruise-specific plan. But in principle, we agree broadly that we do not want the country to return to a high volume, low quality experience. We don't want mass cruise tourism. What we want to have is cruise tourism that is at a reasonable number, reasonable amount that the country can accommodate, and at the same time have the Caymanian businesses and Caymanian workers in that industry earn a higher return from that. So we've had discussions with the cruise lines, as you know, Wendy, we've had the cruise lines visiting, or the representatives visiting in the past weeks, and we've had very strong discussions with them along those lines. We need to see a higher, lower quantity, lower volume, higher value cruise industry for Cayman and for Caymanians. And they have all acknowledged that is a very legitimate perspective, and that they will be supportive of us moving in that direction. So we're very optimistic that we will be able to build a stronger cruise tourism strategy, which clearly builds in those types of principles and objectives. And we will be able to transform what was originally, a mass tourism approach and lower value to one with a more moderate volume, but much higher values for the country.
Thank you. Airport connector, because that's another tourism factor, seems to be stalled. I've asked the question. I've been asking for 3 weeks. Nobody's answering my question. What's happening with the airport connector? It seems stalled.
The airport connector road?
Yeah.
That is, I understand, that is being worked on right now. The paper, in order to accomplish that and move that forward, I think will be coming to caucus fairly shortly. It has been under consideration. They've been working on some of the details on it for.
No, the road itself, it's built, but it's stalled, nothing's happening. There's tarmac there, ready, cars to go on it, nothing happening.
The airport.
Part of it, yeah, part of the road, the one that's the one that DART's building. It's an NRA project, but DART's doing it.
Yeah,
the one round the back of the dump.
I'm not familiar with.
Okay. Is there any way that somebody can answer me that question? Because I've sent questions in there.
But the road is not finished. It cannot be opened.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It's been stalled for ages. It's like it got going and then it stopped. So we were just wondering, because it's part of the tourism rebuild.
Perhaps not as significant as it might appear, given that we're building on volumes and we're nowhere near where we were originally. But yes, it is a significant aspect of it, I believe. But to be honest, Wendy, I'm not that familiar with all the details of it. I can tell you that it is coming back on the radar. It is going back to caucus and then ultimately come to cabinet to resolve all the outstanding details to move that forward.
Okay, cool. Finally, this is a more of a public health question. It might be the child that was airlifted off the island because she was sick with COVID. I understand you said she was a visitor. Weren't part of the rules of visitors had to have health insurance before they could come? So how did it happen?
What was the question?
Well, the child that we've been speaking about recently was a child of a couple that were working on island.
But the child wasn't resident?
The child was not a dependent of those individuals, and that's so not on their work permit. The child was being, I don't know all the details, but I'm assuming the child was being taken care of by someone else in Jamaica. It's, that's quite a common thing.
So it wasn't a guest.
Right. That's why we've described the child as a visitor, and as a result of that, the child didn't have insurance coverage. But we are very happy to have been able to provide a solution and to participate in the transport of the child. It was just amazing. It was heartrending to know that we had a child that was suffering through COVID and was gravely ill. I think many people know that and all of us, we're all softies when it comes to children in particular, and it was so heartwarming to see that child recover to the point that it appeared quite normal. It seemed quite normal, but we knew it still needed this life-saving treatment. And to be able to ensure that was going to happen was a great relief.
So the explanation is the child was a dependent of work permit holders. Yes. I think people thought he was a tourist, so that was a misunderstanding. No, right. I just have one final question because it is about recovery and thereafter. The planning review panel, there's not a single person on it that has any climate experience, any sustainability experience. It's largely contractors. I think people are quite upset. They were expecting there to be at least somebody with some kind of, or at least somebody from your department. It's so critical so our post rebuild of COVID and development. Can you explain why that panel that's reviewing such an important law has absolutely no one with any sustainability experience on it at all?
Well, let me say this. The panel does not have exclusive authority to make decisions and recommendations as to what changes are required to the law to reflect the kinds of concerns that you have. So they will be making recommendations that will then form the basis of drafting instructions, which will be reflected ultimately in a revised bill. We will, at all of those stages, still be in a position to take comments, take suggestions from all groups that want to put those forward as well. And then obviously, once it is in bill form, it can go out for public consultation. Constitutionally, we now have an extended period, but we could also put the bill out for consultation as a white paper before it actually gets tabled in the Parliament. So the opportunity will be there, and I will certainly be looking forward to ensure that any groups that want to have the opportunity to comment are allowed to have that opportunity, and that those comments and those perspectives are brought to bear and considered by caucus and by cabinet in respect of any changes to that law.
Thank you. Also, will we ever get a press briefing that's not about COVID, where we can ask all of these other questions? Because I have about another 10.
Well, we're almost there. This is a good start, right?
Yeah, well, I thought I'd take advantage since we're recording. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Wendy. Before I move on to Seaford from the Compass, I do have one question. Premier Panton, in light of all the plans and protocols that have been put in place and will become effective once cruise tourism begins again next week, what is the plan should, for some reason, the numbers of persons who are going to be dealing directly with COVID, with cruise passengers, what's the plan to be put in place if we see the numbers of COVID cases with that particular group of people or employees for businesses and stuff, if those numbers of cases start to increase?
Right. Well, I mean, I'll let my colleague speak to it in a second as well, because I think it's important to have the Ministry of Health perspective. But just from my own perspective, it's a case of assessing the data, seeing what it's trying to see what it's telling us, and deciding what additional requirements may be necessary in order to make adjustments, in terms of protection and protocols. It may also be that it's regarded as something that isn't going to continue. It is not that significant. But we'll rely on the health, the public health expertise that is available to us, and the advice of our Chief Medical Officer. And I'm very confident, as I'm sure the Minister is, that we'll get good advice based on what they're seeing, and they'll indicate to us what they think is appropriate and how to respond.
Okay, Minister Turner.
Just to expound on what our Honourable Premier has stated, this is, and I like what Wendy said, is there ever going to be a press briefing that it's not about COVID? Trust me, Ministry has some other things as well that we would like to get to, a lot of. But one of the things to be reminded, or to remind the public, is that public health does not close down. There have been so much silver linings out of COVID and the way we've managed it thus far. It has also allowed us to see the gaps, the failures, and improvements that is grossly needed in some cases. And even though the numbers of local transmission has gone down, we continue to hope that remains the place, is why non-medical public health protocols remain in place for this very same nature. Contact tracing does not stop, it continues. There are other public health diseases out there that is constantly being monitored, and all the staff that were actually pulled from other departments and new employed persons in public health will have to remain, because as we stated earlier on, the pandemic is not over. COVID is still out there. And what we are doing with this with this somewhat window of opportunity is enhancing and just making sure we retain the skill sets so that if there be another outbreak, hoping that is not, we don't want any other outbreak, but at least what shortfalls or what gaps that needed to be filled, we're enhancing our public health services is concerned, that we will use this time to make sure those improvements are put in place.
I have one other question. Sorry, Seaford. The other question relates to the fact that the Disney Magic will be the first ship to come on Monday. It's a family ship, lots of kids. Will the kids have to adhere to the same protocols, and how does that meet stayover visitors with families and children?
When you say the same protocols, you mean on island?
Wearing yeah,
Yes.
the wearing of masks and so on.
All of our current protocols will, unless, to the extent not change, and we really haven't changed any of the protocols that apply specifically to our residents or other visitors. Those will apply to passengers coming off the Disney Magic as well.
Okay.
What is to be reminded is that indoor mask wearing remains. Once you're traveling in a public transport or a tour bus, once you're in that space, masks are required. And the vaccination status of those children that are coming in, they would take the vaccination status of their parents. Now, of course, if you're outside lounging on the beach or doing outdoor activities, the regulations has been amended that you don't need a covering.
Sure.
There's no difference when those tourists disembark their cruise ship that from those who are traveling, and for us, once they enter a place of business, it is still a legal requirement that a facial covering is worn, and businesses have the right to request that their patrons cover their nose and mouth when they're shopping or at a restaurant, not sitting at a table. Once you're moving about, that your face and nose is covered.
Okay, thank you, Premier Panton. Minister Turner. We now go to Seaford from the Compass.
I don't have much questions because Wendy took all of them. But hotels have recently complained, and other tourism business have recently complained that a lot of their major people have been denied work permits. And I know that what the government is currently trying to do is get more Caymanians involved in the tourism sector. But, as the borders now start to reopen and we get more cruise lines coming in, will there be some relaxing of work permits specifically for people who are keeping a lot of these tourism business up and running? Because a lot of the businesses are saying some of the Caymanians aren't qualified and some simply aren't just qualifying for the jobs.
Yeah, so generally, yes. Do we want more Caymanians working? Yes, we do. We have, based on we haven't done a labor force survey recently, but we can extrapolate from data that came from the census that began in October last year, that there's around 1,700 Caymanians who are unemployed, and we want to try to find opportunities for those Caymanians to be employed. We have had numerous discussions with the key stakeholders in tourism, many of the big hotels, and of course you've seen responses from quite a few of them. The Ritz-Carlton, the Kimpton, they all did job fairs. There was one down at the Westin as well. So we have been pushing for those opportunities to try to get people in those positions. Obviously, we can't do the job for them. Our people have to be willing, and they have to want the job. They have to want to work. But it's our responsibility to try to give them that opportunity. To the extent that we have had difficulties with permits being issued, we have to recognize as a government, as a country, that the private sector needs the staff that they have to have in order to provide the products and provide the services that they're known for. Otherwise, it's cutting off our nose to spite our face. We cannot have a tourism product that has low quality because we don't have the staff there in order to provide those services. So that, yes, has to change. We have to make sure that if there is a perception, if there is a view that there has been a slowdown in the accommodation of work permits for these individuals and for the businesses, we've got to make sure that happens, because it's in our interest as a government, as an economy, as a country, to make sure that those people are there and able to provide the services that add quality and value to the tourism product. It's always about this fine line of trying to make sure that you promote the interests of Caymanians as well as ensure that the private sector has who they need. Perhaps we have gotten the balance a little bit wrong. Perhaps we have just been a bit too eager in trying to make sure that Caymanians got back in and were given fair opportunities. But we will make adjustments to try to make sure that we strike the right balance, that people who genuinely need those work permits will get them. And I think given where we're at with tourism accelerating, stayover tourism accelerating, cruise tourism restarting, we are at a point where we need to make sure that the balance is right. So as I said, to the extent that we haven't had the balance right, we're going to try to make sure that we do a better job of that.
We know outdoor sports have recently benefited from some relaxing of regulations. Indoor sports, specifically boxing, has continued to suffer in terms of getting their athletes to peak level or even competing in competition. Is there any thing the government is currently doing at the moment to make an exception for athletes to continue their training, like sparring, which is currently not required?
Currently not allowed?
Allowed. They're not required to do so. Yeah.
I don't know if Minnesota has a specific answer to that.
No, I don't.
I am probably uncertain. It may be that Dr. Newton may have a better idea.
With boxing or certain indoor sports?
Yeah, so
training.
they're not allowed to have contact indoors, but that's preventing boxers to carry out their training.
I guess it's a risk.
Okay.
Maybe Dr. Newton can expound on that or answer that question.
Right. Thank you for the questions, which is a very interesting one. I think we need to move towards the idea that indoors activity needs to restart. I have to be honest with you, there's so many things you have to look at that this hasn't been scrutinized in details. So I don't want to go and say things now, oh yes, everything is fine, or let's go ahead, because it's never just the decision of one person. You need to discuss, see the evidence, see what is going on in other part of the world, and then come to a conclusion, which then you propose to cabinet, and then it's up to cabinet to take the last final decision. I think the key point, which will help enormously, is again that people are vaccinated. So we are reassured that when they are inside, there is no, the risk of transmission or something happening is much, much less. After that, I think, yes, we can have a good look at the regulation, not just for the boxing, but for all the inside sports. I think, we can have a look at that. We can mandate the vaccination. obviously. It's still a choice for the people, but it's very much to see how our vaccination rates improves, and then get the green lights for all the inside sports. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in summary then, we're going to have a look at that very carefully, and thank you for raising that question.
Okay, I do have one final question before we have final words from the panel. The question is, can a pastor or bishop be exempt from the vaccine based on his or her religious beliefs?
That's a request that medical officer of health.
On
can
their
be the one to
religious
call.
beliefs?
An exemption.
Yeah, there are a lot of pastors and bishops or heads of churches that don't want to be vaccinated, but they're being affected.
Well, I mean, personal beliefs are to be respected. Asking a health exemption doesn't make very much sense. From a point of view of health and public health, we simply look at the science. So it's not up to us to say we granted exemption on a basis of beliefs. It's just not up to us. We just stick to what is science. Okay, thank you.
So Donna, the question didn't come with clear context, but I'm assuming this is in relation to travel?
Travel, I think in some cases work permits, because a large base of our pastors are work permit holders, or they're exempted from work permits because they're in a nonprofit organization.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, we do have in the Immigration Transition Act changes that were done, we do have an exemption where people are medically unable
Right.
to take it. I don't recall that there's an exemption for people based purely on belief, clearly on medical, but I don't think it relates to belief. And certainly in relation to travel, there isn't an exemption based on your personal belief.
Okay. Thank you very much, Premier Panton. Any final words from you both?
I'll be short, sweet, and spicy and leave the end note to our Honourable Premier. I just want to thank, for this opportunity to continue in engaging, and hopefully, going back to Wendy, that other press briefings will cover other topical issues to share in this government's vision and moving forward in her term. But I still have to, as Minister of Health and Wellness, publicly thank everyone for stepping up to the plate and adhering to public health protocols. We understand that it's getting a little tiresome. We're competing almost with social media, what's happening in other jurisdictions. But one thing is to remain at the forefront of all of our minds, is that we know what our resources or capabilities are. Mm-hmm. And as we enter into the relaxation, embracing of cruise tourism, and definitely welcoming more stay-over tourists, that the risk does not go away because we are still in a pandemic. And I would like to take this opportunity to encourage parents to educate themselves, to let persons know within the school that we will continue our outreach program to make sure that a number of these town hall virtual meetings will continue, where we will have the experts like our Dr. Newton and public health officials in collaboration with schools to educate and inform those parents in the importance of booster. But I want to take this opportunity to wish everyone a healthy and a good weekend. And until next time, thank you again.
Okay, Premier Panton.
Yeah, I will just add, my thanks to those who have been involved in working through the changes that we've needed to make to the regulations to allow us to move forward with this significant milestone of having cruise tourism restart. The significance of that, as I mentioned earlier, to so many businesses and to so many individuals are very clear to all of us in government. We want to make sure that that goes ahead as smoothly as possible, and that our lives as a whole, our economy as a whole, starts to move back to a greater degree of normalcy. The reality is, COVID, as I said, has not gone away. Its impact on us is going down, and I hope that continues But that doesn't mean it should be ignored. And that is why we will continue to be vigilant, continue to monitor, and continue to try to ensure that it goes in the right direction, and we continue to benefit from all the various things that we've successfully put in place, including driving the vaccination rate as high as we have, continuing to push and promote the booster, and seeking to increase the vaccination rate for children, for those parents who want to have that. You know, I've had many children speak to me and say, yes, I want to do this, I want to do this. Obviously, it's up to the parents. It's a combined decisions in some cases. But we're moving in a good direction. Cayman is doing exceptionally well on many sort of matrices that you want to assess it against. And I think this is really, really positive for us. We're looking forward with excitement to the next move with some crews restarting. And I'm looking forward to, you know, over the balance of this year, working out clarity around a new strategy to try to achieve the objectives and the goals that I previously outlined, in terms of making sure that we have a better balance in terms of quantity versus value to this country. And that is across the board for any kind of tourism. Obviously, we want our tourism product to be the best that it can be in the Caribbean, when we know we have so much value to add, and it should give Caymanians so much pride to be able to try to continue to maintain that, and for us and those people who benefit from it to make their living, and to have their being and raise their families on the basis of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Premier Panton, and to you, Minister Turner, as well, and always to you, the public, and of course, members of the media who are here today. We're glad that everyone was here to hear this important information that you can watch on the Cayman Islands Government YouTube channel on demand. Of course, you can go online to gov.ky as well as hsa.ky for anything that is COVID-related, including schedules of clinics, so on and so forth. So until next time, have a safe and wonderful weekend, everyone.